Well, hello, and welcome back, everybody. I'm AJ O'Neill, and it's Beyond Code Live. Yeah, and we are going to be talking about the two hardest things in computer science, which, of course, are, if my keyboard will work here, caching, naming things, and off by one errors. Now, I'm AJ O'Neill. You can follow me on Twitter at _BeyondCode if you want the structured content like this. Twitch.tv/CoolAJ6 is all the live content, structured and unstructured. I'm a technophobic technologist, a dangerous wrong thinker, and an equal opportunity offender. So if your feelings are hurt during this presentation, don't worry about it. Oh, and of course we meant the three hardest things in computer science. Little cliche joke there. All right. Now, those were listed in alphabetical order. We'll not be presenting them in alphabetical order. In fact, we'll be doing the opposite because I think off by one errors are the easiest to demonstrate and kind of get through why these are hard errors. Now, I'm not going to give you the solutions. I'm going to give you the problems because the solution is be aware of the problems. All right. So I want you to count to 10. I'm going to give you 0 seconds to do that. Okay. Now that you've counted to 10, I lied about waiting. How many numbers did you count? Now, if you're a proper computer scientist, not what did you count to, but how many did you count, right? That's distinction. So if you're a proper computer scientist, you would have counted to 11, of course, because 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Obviously. Now, here's a trick question for you. Well, I guess that was actually trick question 0. Here's trick question 1. How many numbers are in this range? You've got 4i and 0, ... 10. How many numbers are in this range? There are going to be 10 numbers in that range. If we count that range, there will be 10 numbers. Now, trick question part 2 to this, and maybe I'll show that for just 2 more seconds here so you can see. I'm just saying if I were to put a count there. All right, so part 2 to this is which numbers are in this range? 0, ... 10. And the answer is, I'm not going to tell you. You'll have to go find out for yourself. No, I'll tell you later. We'll get there. All right. So how about this range? Okay. So which numbers were in this range? Which numbers are in this range? So 1, ... 10. Which numbers are in that range? Or how about this range? 0, ... 10. Okay, so actually, let me just go back here and I'll tell you the answer. So in this range, we're going to have the numbers 0 through 9. In this range, we're going to have the numbers 1 through 9. And in this range, we're going to have the numbers 0 through 10. So this is my original counting to 11. Not to 11. All right. Now, here's another trick question. Which is the first element in this array? Well, you probably come up with your answer. Which is the first element in this array? Are you sure? And of course you shouldn't be, because the first element in the array is going to be bananas, because the 0th element is apples. All right. Yes. All right. Moving on. Which fruits would this range print? What do you get when you mix an elephant with a rhino? Elephino. Oh, it didn't. There was supposed to be an elephino. There was a picture of an elephino, but yeah, there we go. All right. So now count to 10 again. Maybe you're a little less sure what counting to 10 should entail. But don't worry about it. We'll move ahead. So here's another trick question. Can you find the needle in this haystack? So what is index going to return? It is going to return, of course, 0. And what about, can you find the needle in this haystack? Well, it's going to return -1. So, we're counting, -1 is not, you get what I'm saying here? This is troublesome. So we hopefully you're getting the point here. We'll go through the rest of this quickly. So which fruit will this select? Or this one? Hopefully that makes that clear. So we think, oh, the length, if it's the last one, then it's going to be cherries. No, it's actually going to be the last one plus 1, because we're off by 1. Same thing here. And this demonstrates that if it's empty and the length is 0 and you take the 0th, what do you get? Error, panic, right? Okay, so the last time, count to 10. What do we start at -1? I don't know. And then, not to mention you've got the octal, you've got the hexadecimal, you've got the byte. So there's so many different ways that you could be off by 1, depending on which number system you're using, depending on what type of indexing the language you're uses, depending on what type of range selector you're using. So this is the problem of off by 1, and this is partially why it's hard. And then you have just typos. You could be off by 1 letter. The difference between this is JavaScript splice and slice. One will empty the array, and the other will copy the array. You want a presentation about complex array and object manipulation. I will give you one about simple array and object manipulation, and you will probably find it to be complex enough to meet your needs. We will, yes, put that in the content request channel and the Discord, please. Okay. So then here's another, you can have slightly different APIs that work differently. So substring in JavaScript and subster in JavaScript, they work differently. So you pass in the same parameters. They look as though they'd be aliases of one another, but actually they work completely differently, as you can see the output here. So if you really want to be familiar with off by 1 errors, if you want to encounter a ton of them and enjoy every minute of it, what I would recommend is that you implement chess in a 1D array, which is basically meaning that you put the whole chessboard in one array of 64 squares, elements. And if you want to cheat, you could actually make the chessboard size 65 elements so that you could start at 1, but you might find that that actually does not help you as much as you might think it would help you. But if you're having the off by 1 problem, implement a simple game that is a board-based game in a one-dimensional array where you have to say, well, the first row is this number through this number, the second row is this number through this number, and so on. That's a really good way to get familiar with that problem. Now, number 2 is we're going to be talking about naming things. So naming things, these are 2 talks, isn't really a to-do. It's just, well, the to-do would have been maybe to put the thumbnails here, but there are 2 talks here, and the link to the slides are in the description to some talks by Ethan Garofalo, and he is talking about basically the importance of, do we pick consistent naming, such as saying we create a thing, we update a thing, we delete a thing, we list a thing, or do we pick names that are descriptive to whatever the thing or the process is? So for example, you don't create a user, you register a user, because the user already existed in the world before you ever encountered them, but you register the user, or you register an account for the user, and so forth. So that's what that was about. Now let's take a look at some collection of functions. Okay, what should we name a collection of functions that includes this thing, or these things? Maybe just take a look at it for a second again. Okay, so we could maybe call it auth, we could maybe call it user, we could maybe call it session. That any of these might be valid names for that package. So there's multiple names that could work. Which one's the best one? And if you use a different one when you go to expand the functionality and you add more functions than what's here, will that name still make sense afterwards, or will you end up wanting to change that name? So I say probably here because probably, yeah, one of those is probably the right name for it, but we don't know. So how about a package with all of these in it? What would you call a package that has all of these functions in it? Stuff, because there's no relationship here. It's just random things. We call it Lodash, right? Or we can call it dependency hell, because typically speaking, when you are dealing with that type of package, it's just a bunch of clutter for something that you could do in 2 or 3 lines anyway. So take your pick there. Oh, yep, that's the one I'm going to pick. I'm going to pick the last one. Okay, so then you have industry standard terms that don't work together either. So, the newest buzzword for this is ETL. So map versus migrate versus transform versus ETL. We got to keep the buzzwords fresh, right? And then you have things, token, code, secret, key. PK, is that private key or is that public key? Is it an API key or is it a secret key? Is it a client ID or is it a consumer ID? So in the industry, I actually just go back to the first point here. Most people don't know the industry standard terms. But if you do know the industry standard terms, do you know the right terms for, this season of fashion in the industry standards? Because these terms change, right? So naming things is just difficult. Think back to chess. What do you call where the pieces go? Now, we kind of cheated because I already thought about this and I already said that word. But were they slots? Are they elements? Are they places? Are they squares, cells, spaces, coordinates, thingies? What do you call where the pieces go? It's an element in an array, right? Or it's a cell in a row, or a cell in a table, or a cell in a grid. It's a space on the board. It's coordinates, A1, B2. Oh, I know. Why don't we just call it B sub I? Because B is obviously board and sub I is whatever the position is. Nailed it. No, we don't want to do that. We definitely don't want to do that. But I would vote on squares. The point of all of this being that we had one more example. So here's a function. This is actually super similar to something that we just went through at work recently. What would you name this function? Currently it's named limit. But what does it even do? If you wanted to name this well, you'd actually have to break these things apart a little bit and give them slightly more descriptive names to say what is the generic thing we're trying to do, which is limit or filter, but what is the purpose for which we're utilizing this in our code right now. From the code here, we can't tell what this does. This looks like a very generic filtering function, and it is. So yeah, I already told you the story time. Basically, the other part of the story time is the other day we spent pretty much the whole day working through about two functions that were like this, but more terse. So imagine this, but 4 times as much and in the same number of lines of code. And there was a few of those, and we spent maybe not the whole day. We spent about half a day going through those. And at the end, it was worth it because we took one of the most complex, least understood pieces of the code, and then now 2 people understood it as opposed to, I'm not sure that anybody understood it before. There was one person that could work in it, but I don't know if anybody understood it. So naming things is, that was supposed to be, what does this even do? That was supposed to be an Elefino again. And then that was supposed to come I get the slides out of order all the time. Anyway, so yeah, we want to name things. Well, it's hard, and I'll say a little bit more about this later, but it's part of engineering. It's billable hours to take the time to think what does this do? What is the name of this process? And if we can't name it, we probably need to break it down because there's probably too many things. If you cannot describe to someone in a few words what a function does, then it's probably not. You need to break it down. You need to or rethink what it is you're doing because you may literally not know what you're doing. Okay, and then we're finally down to caching and invalidating, and this is okay. Now I'm not even doing the trick questions in the right order, but there's real life examples that you can think of for this one. So imagine if you've ever given a girlfriend or a sibling a key to, say, your apartment or your car. This is a normal thing to do, and this is a form of caching in a sense because you're giving someone a key. You're giving them access to some feature of your life, but if it turns out that they are crazy, then you need to revoke that. But the problem is that if you can't trust someone with a key, then you can't trust them without the key. Reason being that they could have easily made a copy of a key. In fact, when I'm given a key, I often make a copy of it so that when I get a new car or whatever, I often put the original key in my lockbox and I go copy a key and I make a few copies and I put one in the sock drawer like everybody does and give one to my wife and give one to my sister, whatever. But you can't take back a copy of a key. So then you would have to change your doors if you wanted to assure the security. You can't just take back the key. You have to change the locks. So another trick question here about caching and validation. These are just to get the juices flowing. It might not make sense at first, but we're getting there. Have you ever sat through a roll call in school? If you're absent, raise your hand. You have to go through every single element in the array. You have to go through every single person in the room to count who is present to find out which isn't present. And this is a common problem in caching and invalidating, is that there's no easy way to get what isn't there. You have to count what is there. You have to enumerate all of the things that you have to know what you don't have. Okay, so, and then here's another one. This is a little bit off. It's a little bit on the edges, but it's still similar. So if you're familiar with daylight savings time, how do you schedule an event that's 6 months in advance? So sometimes when you save data, the data is time sensitive in of itself. The data is not concrete. So if I save an event with you, and I say that we want to meet at 5 p.m., if I were to save that time in UTC, then if I was just to rehydrate the time from UTC, so I say at 5 p.m. in New York, and we save it as UTC in the database, and it's an event that's 6 months away, and then we retrieve it out of the database, when we convert it back, we'll get either 4 p.m. or 6 p.m. We won't get 5 p.m. So the meeting was supposed to be at 5 p.m., but because it was over a daytime boundary or a daylight savings boundary, now it's either at 4 or 6 p.m. So it's an hour off, and we didn't do anything wrong. We just saved it. You know, the time itself is fungible, as it were. I don't know if that's actually the correct usage of the word, but time is not constant. And then you can even have this problem of time zones change. So I'm not going to go into all of that, but time zones are a voting process and they change. So if you wanted to schedule something 2 years in the future, even if you calculated the time zone correctly the first time around and you accounted for the switch, then you can't necessarily count on it being correct. You can be relatively correct within 6 months, but within 2 years, you can't know because somebody could have voted the time to be different. So that's another problem. Okay. Also, this is the number one trick question. Have you ever tried to use a React app? Okay. Something goes wrong and it keeps going wrong and somebody says they fixed it. And so you reload and then you reload again and then you clear the cache and then you clear the cookies and then you clear the cache, cookies, and local storage. And then you turn it off and on again. And then you delete your OS and reinstall. And then they find out that it actually was a bug that they hadn't published in the first place. But you've experienced this. So these are the problems. This is why people say this is hard. Oh yeah, there we go. Yep. I tried to load a React app. Okay. So trick question number 2, how do you update a website or cache a website? The questions are the same. So do you say that, if I build out a website, I just build it, static site, do I do an update when the content changes? Do I do an update when the theme is changed? So no content changed, but the theme changed. If the little section down at the bottom with the related articles, if that needs to change, then do I regenerate that page? Or what if the author changes their email address? Then, yeah. So the thing that I'm pointing out here is there's this dependency tree. Because if you think about it simply, you say, oh, if I want to cache this blog article, well, it was published at the time it was published, so we're good to go. But no, somebody might edit it. There might be some errata. And then also there's all of these other side effects of the content might not change, but these other things may change. So there's a dependency graph. So anytime you start to cache things, whether it's for performance or for convenience, you're caching things locally because you're developing, you're caching things on the web host because you want to reduce bandwidth costs, or you want things to be theoretically faster, which often I don't know that actually works out the way that you think it does, especially with the way that people do things, but that's a different topic entirely. There's a dependency tree. And so you have to figure out which nodes invalidate which other nodes, or if you just want to say, screw it, anything changes, we're rebuilding all 500 articles on the site. And that's the nuclear option, right? Okay, so plus, you also have all of the off by one problems too. So add into all of this, content change stuff, just little errors where you got the range wrong or you got the time off a little bit. You did a greater than or equal to rather than a greater than or some such, right? So Oh yeah, and then if we want to take the opposite approach, so this is just thinking, and this only makes sense if you actually know about the difference between GraphQL and REST, but GraphQL kind of, it poses that you're going to be able to do all this caching and everything's going to be great and you're going to be able to save on bandwidth, but anybody who has used it in more than a topical sense knows that that's not the way that it really goes. I won't go into it because I would consider that to be more of an advanced topic, and it seems that it is thankfully on the decline, that the buzz and hype for that might be over. Fingers crossed. Yeah. Oh yeah. This is Tom, the full stack developer. He uses GraphQL. Anyway, so solutions. What can I give you any solutions for the caching problems? I'll give you a little bit. So hashes, because caching problems, we can talk about some solutions. Whereas the other two, there's not a ready-made solution in a box that I can give to you. But so we've got hashes, meaning that you can generally run automatic processes that will rewrite your file names in your, say, HTML files, for example, or if you're not doing a web app, you can do this in other ways. You can basically make a hash part of the file name or the object storage name or whatever. So you could have a reverse problem of cache invalidation with this, where you don't necessarily know that because you got a new asset that the old asset is no longer needed, or if you have a new asset, it doesn't mean that the old asset isn't any longer needed. But this is at least a strategy to guarantee that if you know you need a new asset, if it has a hash in it, and that's part of your build pipeline or your process, which is generally pretty easy to do, then you can solve that part of the problem. You can also have a time to live on something. And so HTTP in of itself has, I don't know, 6 different ways to do this. Between it has expires at, it has etag, it has, but that's etag's more of a hash. It has, there's 2 or 3 different ways to specify expires at. Maybe one is invalid at, I don't remember off the top of my head. But you can look at this from a perspective of, you could do it in seconds, how many seconds from now. Yeah, the expires in versus expires at. You could do it at a UTC time and say it expires at this time. You could save a local time and the offset and the time zone altogether, so that at any point in time you could compare it against the current time, even if daylight savings or weird time things have changed. And then I don't know what the I don't know was supposed to be there. Oh yeah, that's the so other than that, I don't know, be smart, which is hard. But you can do fresh, stale, and expired. This is a good trick for caching, is if you can mark something that you know is fresh, a condition that's on this side of the boundary, it's definitely fresh. And there's a condition on this side of the boundary, it's definitely expired, you do not want to use it. And then there's states where it's kind of in the middle and maybe you can use it. It's stale, you should go check, you should go fetch in the background for new data, but you can keep the existing data and continue to use it. So basically useful, not useful, and probably useful, but updated in the background. Definitely not service workers unless you really understand all the nuance of them. So service workers is definitely not a solution to caching problems, because I have seen it create so many caching problems. That said, it can be a solution. But I'm just, and this is more of an advanced topic, but just if somebody tells you service workers, you just think of that aliens guy, with the big hair, aliens. That, somebody says, oh, caching problems, service workers. Not necessarily. They can work, but just a caution on that one, because I know they're popular right now. Okay, so in summary, caching. Caching is all about level of granularity and tolerance for error. That is, I should have put that as the first slide, but that is what caching is about. If you want to kind of think of an engineering approach towards it. Oh no, it looks like I indeed this was not an intentional off by 1 error, but it was in fact an off by 1 error. It is apropos. We're leaving the slide as is, will not correct in future iterations of this presentation. So naming things is part of engineering that takes buildable time and reduce wasted time, because you're taking the time to think of what the thing is, which causes mental load then, but it reduces mental load every other time. And you're going to write code once and you're going to read it many times. So you want to optimize for reducing mental load. Also, it reduces outdated documentation, because the code is going to change, but the documentation is not going to change with the code. So if you simply name variables well and name functions well inside of your code, then you are reducing the other places that you need to go update, especially if it's languages where the code or some level of documentation is auto-generated, like what we see in Go and Rust, for example. So it does take time, but no one ever regretted naming something well. But then again, there's, on the flip side, people do regret spending hours over trivial details. So, there's a happy medium. Don't name things stuff, utils, things, tools. And I mean, there is an exception to that, of course, but in general, if you're reaching for that, if you don't have a clear name, if it sounds very generic and could apply to anything, it's probably a bad name. Okay, and then the off by one errors. Counting is hard because we've got the 0 index versus 1 index versus different languages, different applications. For example, in JavaScript, months are 0 indexed, days are 1 indexed. We've got inclusive versus non-inclusive ranges. So, and then there are also ranges that I didn't show that are inclusive to the right side, but not the left side. So there are certain range operators where if you do 0 to 10, it'll actually do 1 to 10 as opposed to 0 to 9. And then we just, we count in different ways. Are we counting from -1? Are we counting, do we have to consider the case of, to the user, we're telling them there's 256 slots, but those slots are between 0 and 255. So we have to do translation. There's all these types of things that can pop up. So I'm going to turn the time over to you now. Feel free to ask me questions. Appreciate questions, particularly about this presentation, but you can pop up with other questions too. And I'll just wait for a second while we go through that. So you formulate those. And in the meantime, if you want to, if this was useful for you, if you enjoyed it, if it was entertaining, or if it helped you go to sleep, go ahead and click the like. Also on YouTube, sub if you want to get more like this. Actually, this is the live channel. If you want to sub, the Beyond Code channel doesn't have enough subscribers yet to have its own little name, and so it'd have this heck of a long URL, but it's Beyond Code Bootcamp on YouTube with the B. So if you want to subscribe to just this type of content, that's the curated content, that's the way to go. And then follow on Twitch for the live streams, and then click all the things down in the doobly-doo. There's some goodies for you that you might find useful. Michael now asks the question, just as I'm about to leave. Okay. I'll bite. How long can a function name be? There is no length to a function name. Now, that can vary from one language to another. However, I recommend that you scope your functions such that they don't have to have ridiculously long names. If you look at Objective-C code, those names are way too long. But so there is, there's this thing called the law of specificity, which I might have made up, but I'm pretty sure I didn't. I think I got it from somewhere, which is that it depends on how specific what you're doing is, how long the name needs to be. So I is a perfectly fine single character variable for when you're doing I, J, and K if you need to do some sort of nested loop stuff. Those are perfectly valid names. If you are doing something that is highly unusual, a longer name makes more sense. And the same is true with functions and everything else. But if you have a function scoped to a package, one thing you don't want to do is stutter. So what I mean by stuttering is that you have a package that includes maybe too many things. It's got some user stuff, it's got some group stuff, it's got some other stuff, and then you have a function that is create user and update user and user and user. You don't want your repetition to be on the right side. Your repetition should be on the left side and separated by a dot or whatever the operator is in your language. It might be colon, it might be an arrow, whatever. But so the user package or the user module or however you want to look at it, it's called different names in different languages, should exist. And then you should have a function on that might be user.register if you decide to go with the human naming route, or user.create if you decide to go with the traditional route, and so on and so forth. And you will separate out those functions into modules. It's perfectly normal and fine that you have a create user function and you realize later, oh, I need to create a user module. But you want to avoid stuttering. So the name should be, if I know what file I'm in, which I should because my editor is going to tell me, and if I know what the general area of the code is, I should be able to tell from the context of where I am and the name of the function that I'm looking at, I should have a relatively good idea of what it is that I'm trying to do. All right, so I hope that was helpful. Any other questions? I'll wait another 30 seconds. And then I do have another stream coming up that's going to be, I'm going to go through some webinstall.dev pull requests because people have added more things and I have neglected it because I was busy. And again, thank you very much for that question. I appreciate the questions, especially in the live streams that are, this one's prepared material. I'm kind of trying to go through it, but yeah, I really, really love the questions on live streams. I love the questions, period. Appreciate it. It's nice to have the interaction. All right. So again, thank all of you for joining in. Thank you for your questions and your participation. Thanks for saying hello. I appreciate all of that. I hope to see you again. Like and subscribe if you want to. Give it a thumbs down if you didn't like it, and share with someone that you like. If you did like it, share with someone that you don't like if you didn't like it. And I will catch you later. Wait, I did that wrong again. Adios. Yeah, now it felt too artificial. It used to be natural and now it's forced.